The Brotherhood of Steel was born not from glory, but from disillusionment, and the Maxson name, etched into the very armor of its paladins, was forged in the fires of humanity's final betrayal. When the Great War reduced the world to cinders in October 2077, it was Captain Roger Maxson, a decorated officer stationed at the Mariposa military base in California, who first saw the abyss into which mankind had fallen. There, amid the steel corridors of a secret pre-war research facility, Maxson uncovered the United States government's final sin: experiments on unwilling soldiers with a viral agent known as the forced evolutionary virus, the seed that would later twist men into the monstrous supermutants. The horror of that discovery shattered his loyalty to the old order. He executed the scientists responsible and transmitted a declaration of secession, an act of rebellion that condemned him as a traitor to the remnants of the U.S. Army, but sanctified him as the first elder to those who followed. Fleeing Mariposa with a company of soldiers and their families, Maxson crossed the irradiated wastes to the safety of Lost Hills, where he proclaimed the founding of a new society built on preservation and discipline rather than politics and ambition. In those early days, he was not yet the patriarch of legend, just a soldier clinging to the idea that order could survive the apocalypse. But as the months turned to years and other survivors gathered under his protection, the Lost Hills bunker became more than refuge. It became doctrine. Technology was to be preserved, hoarded, and studied so that mankind's past mistakes would never be repeated. It was there that the Brotherhood of Steel was born, a militant monastic order whose creed bound knowledge to authority and sanctified the machine as both relic and weapon. Roger Maxson's charisma and military rigor transformed scattered soldiers into knights and scribes, bound by an oath of purity and self-reliance. In this crucible, the Maxson family name ceased to be merely a bloodline. It became a symbol of legitimacy. To be a Maxson was to be the moral and ideological center of the Brotherhood itself. When Roger Maxson died in 2135, the Brotherhood was still in its infancy, but his son, Maxson II, inherited not only the title of elder, but the weight of an emerging orthodoxy. Under Maxson II, the Brotherhood began to consolidate its influence across post-war California, balancing its duty to protect humanity with an increasing tendency toward isolation. The early knights still remembered the communal days of Lost Hills, when the Brotherhood offered assistance to settlements in exchange for knowledge, but the younger generations, raised behind blast doors and steel walls, saw the outside world as contaminated by ignorance and corruption. The Maxson line, though revered, became increasingly removed from the rank and file. Its members treated less as individuals than as incarnations of the founder's will. The death of Maxson II during the Scorpion Bite incident left his son, Maxson III, to rule a brotherhood that had already begun to fracture into ideological camps, those who favored cautious engagement with the wastes, and those who believed in absolute seclusion. It was during this era that the Brotherhood's territorial expansion began to slow, even as its technological power grew unmatched. From Lost Hills, patrols carried the Brotherhood's sigil into the ruins of San Francisco, Bakersfield, and beyond. But the Maxson elders viewed these expeditions as reclamations of heritage rather than conquests. The family's blood had become both its greatest strength and its softest weakness. Every decision weighed against the standard of Roger Maxson's impossible purity. Generations later, as centuries passed, and the Brotherhood splintered into independent chapters, the Maxson name evolved from leadership into mythology. By the dawn of the 23rd century, many in the Western chapter considered the line extinct. Their record spoke of Maxson III's descendants fading into obscurity as political elders replaced hereditary ones. Yet the legend persisted. Whenever disputes arose over doctrine, elders invoked the founder's name as though he were a saint of the machine. When expansionist splinters such as the Midwest Brotherhood emerged, they did so under banners claiming to restore the founder's true vision. That vision, however, had already diverged far from its origins. In 2277, on the opposite side of the continent, a man named Owen Lyons held command of the Brotherhood's East Coast expedition, a mission originally dispatched from Lost Hills to recover pre-war technology from Washington, D.C. Lyons was no Maxson by blood, yet the authority he wielded descended from that lineage, and his deviations from tradition, his humanitarian protection of wastelanders, his alliance with local settlements provoked outrage among the Western elders. It was in this political storm that the last surviving scion of the bloodline would come of age, a boy named Arthur Maxson, great-great-grandson of the founder himself, born within the fortified halls of the Citadel. Arthur's lineage connected him by blood to the Brotherhood's sacred past, yet his childhood unfolded amid an order at odds with itself. The Citadel, a repurposed segment of the Pentagon, was both fortress and sanctuary, echoing with the clatter of armor and the hum of arcane machines. From an early age, the boy was surrounded by the echoes of his ancestors' ideals: discipline, purity, and reverence for technology, but also by the compassion of Elder Lyons, whose softer interpretation of brotherhood duty taught his followers to aid the weak and to defend the innocent. The schism between ideology and empathy shaped Arthur's earliest memories. He saw paladins return from missions not merely with scavenged weapons but with wounded civilians, heard the debates in the Citadel's council chambers over whether Lyons' aid to the people of the Capital Wasteland betrayed the Brotherhood's sacred isolationism, and felt the tension of soldiers torn between tradition and mercy. To the boy, the Brotherhood was both family and faith, a legacy he could neither choose nor escape. Elder Lyons treated him as a surrogate grandson, ensuring his education among the scribes and his training with the knights, but the Council of Elders back west viewed Arthur as a potential instrument, a chance to restore the lost bloodline to prominence and to correct Lyons' perceived heresy. As the years advanced, the fractures deepened. Lyons' daughter, Sentinel Sarah Lyons, became the Brotherhood's most admired warrior, leading campaigns against super mutants and enclave remnants. Yet, even her heroism could not mend the ideological divide. When she perished in the line of duty, the East Coast chapter was left leaderless, its morale shattered, its cohesion dissolving into rival cliques. The Western elders, disillusioned, withdrew official recognition, declaring Lyons' faction excommunicated. It was within this power vacuum that Arthur Maxson's destiny began to coalesce. The brotherhood that had raised him was crumbling, and only the symbol of its founder's blood could reunite it. By the time Arthur reached adolescence, whispers already followed him through the Citadel's corridors. The heir of Lost Hills, the last Maxson, the living link to the origin of their order. For him, the weight of expectation was both blessing and chain. His tutors instilled in him the lore of the early days, the Mariposa Rebellion, the Codex, the sanctity of steel, and from these he drew not nostalgia, but conviction. The founder had created the Brotherhood to save humanity from itself, not to cradle it. The humanitarian softness of the Lyons era, noble though it was, had diluted that mission. In Arthur's eyes, restoration required severity, and the sins of weakness could only be cleansed by discipline. The bloodline's legacy thus passed not merely through genealogy, but through philosophy. In Arthur, the founder's militant idealism reawakened, reshaped by the ruins of DC and the failures of Lyon's idealism. When he assumed the rank of paladin at a remarkably young age, his speeches echoed with the rhetoric of the early Brotherhood, that technology was mankind's salvation only when wielded under the control of the righteous, that compassion without order invited ruin, and that the Brotherhood's destiny was not to coexist with the wasteland, but to command it. The soldiers who served under him spoke of a leader who embodied both the austerity of a monk and the ferocity of a crusader. Yet beneath the armor, the legacy of his lineage remained a living burden. He was expected to be infallible, to manifest the founder's spirit, to justify the centuries of faith that had kept the Maxson name alive. By the time the 23rd, the century reached its 4th decade. The Brotherhood's identity had come full circle. The Maxson line, once nearly forgotten, now stood again at the forefront of power, embodied in a young man who saw himself not as ruler but as custodian of a sacred inheritance. To the Brotherhood, his ascension was providence. To the wasteland beyond, it was omen, for in every age since the Great War, the Maxsons had symbolized the same paradox: saviors who would shield humanity from its own excess, yet who might one day dictate its future by force. From Roger Maxson's mutiny at Mariposa to the boy who would become Elder Arthur Maxson of the Prydwen, the thread of legacy remained unbroken, a steel chain linking the age of the atom to the wars yet to come. And as the Brotherhood's banners once again unfurled over a scarred continent, the world was reminded that history in the wasteland does not end. It repeats, armored and armed, beneath the shadow of a single name. Arthur Maxson's early life unfolded within the fortified halls of the Citadel, the once mighty Pentagon repurposed as a sanctuary and command center for the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel, and from the very beginning, the boy's existence was inseparable from the weight of his family's legendary lineage and the ideological framework that had governed the Brotherhood since the time of Roger Maxson. Born into an order torn between its founding doctrine and the humanitarian deviation of Elder Owen Lyons, Arthur's formative years were marked by a duality of instruction. On one hand, the disciplined militarism and reverence for technology that the Maxson bloodline demanded, and on the other, the moral flexibility, compassion, and strategic pragmatism that Lyons had instilled in his soldiers in an effort to aid the people of the Capital Wasteland. Even as a child, Arthur was acutely aware of the fractures within the Brotherhood. He witnessed knights and paladins debate heatedly over whether Lyons' actions were acts of mercy or betrayals of the founder's original intent, and he heard the whispered conversations of council members, many of whom quietly lamented that the Maxson line no longer commanded authority as it once had. From a young age, Arthur was surrounded by tutors and mentors who emphasized mastery over weaponry, survival tactics, and knowledge of pre-war technology, yet they simultaneously encouraged him to absorb the lessons of diplomacy, resource management, and the politics of maintaining an organization that spanned the ruins of a fractured nation. The Citadel itself was a constant teacher, its blast doors and steel corridors echoing with history, while its hidden laboratories, armories, and archives offered both practical knowledge and ideological reinforcement. Arthur's education was rigorous, designed to instill in him not merely the skills of combat, but the intellectual and philosophical foundations required to lead an entire faction of humanity's remnants. He trained alongside future paladins, scribes, and sentinels, forming bonds and rivalries that would later define the cohesion of the Brotherhood under his eventual leadership. Even play, to the extent it existed within the Citadel's austere confines, was structured to reinforce discipline and strategy. Simulated battles, tactical exercises, and debates over historical engagements served as both education and indoctrination, familiarizing Arthur with the legacy of his ancestors while emphasizing the responsibilities that would one day fall upon his shoulders. Despite this rigid upbringing, there were moments in which the boy could glimpse the human side of the Brotherhood, as Elder Lyons himself often took time to explain the purpose behind the rules, demonstrating that loyalty and strength were not purely about domination or isolation, but also about stewardship of knowledge and protection of the innocent. These lessons, however, were constantly juxtaposed with the ideological rigidity of the Citadel's senior paladins, who saw Lyons's approach as dangerously permissive, and feared that the boy, as the last Maxson heir, might inherit too much empathy and not enough discipline. Arthur absorbed these contradictions silently, internalizing both the harshness of traditional doctrine and the softening influence of Lyons' vision, creating in him a synthesis that would define his later leadership style: uncompromising yet capable of measured judgment, merciless toward deviation, yet capable of inspiring loyalty and respect through reasoned command. His adolescence was punctuated by the constant presence of symbols and artifacts from the Brotherhood's history. The Maxson family armor, ceremonial weapons, and records of past campaigns served as tangible reminders of the weight he bore and the expectations laid upon him by centuries of precedent. Each evening, as he walked, the corridors lined with banners depicting knights and heroes of old, Arthur was reminded that the Citadel was both home and classroom, both cradle and crucible, shaping him into a figure who would one day bridge the gap between the shattered ideals of Lyons' Brotherhood and the unyielding martial vision of the founder. By the time he reached early adolescence, Arthur had already distinguished himself in drills, combat exercises, and theoretical mastery of the Brotherhood's technological archives, earning the cautious admiration of both mentors and peers, yet remaining ever conscious of the scrutiny that accompanied his lineage. It was during these formative years that he first understood the implications of leadership, recognizing that command was less about personal glory than about embodying the ideals and expectations of a centuries-old order while navigating the volatile political and social landscape of a post-apocalyptic world. In these early experiences, the young Maxson learned the value of observation, patience, and subtle influence, understanding that the loyalty of the Brotherhood could not be commanded through fear alone, but had to be cultivated through competence, decisiveness, and the projection of legitimacy rooted in ancestral heritage. The Citadel's archives provided Arthur with access to the detailed histories of conflicts, both before and after the Great War, from the founding of the Lost Hills Bunker and the initial schism with Mariposa, to the rise of Lyons' humanitarian faction and the eventual fracturing of the East Coast chapter, allowing him to study patterns of leadership, strategic successes and failures, and the consequences of ideological compromise. These studies were not academic exercises. They were practical lessons for a boy who would one day assume authority over a military organization where lives, resources, and the preservation of knowledge were all contingent upon his decisions. The boy observed the debates over salvage missions, the allocation of resources, and the treatment of wasteland settlements, internalizing the principles of meritocracy, discipline, and selective engagement that would later define his administration. At the same time, he witnessed the human costs of these policies: the resentment of disenfranchised paladins, the suffering of civilians caught in crossfire or denied aid, and the delicate balancing act required to maintain cohesion among diverse factions within the Brotherhood itself. By the time Arthur reached late adolescence, the combination of rigorous training, historical study, and immersion in the Citadel's culture had transformed him into a remarkably capable young paladin, imbued with a profound understanding of both the philosophical underpinnings of his order and the practical realities of commanding men in a hostile, irradiated world. Yet even as he honed his tactical skills and intellectual acumen, the boy remained acutely aware of the legacy he carried. As the last known descendant of Roger Maxson, he was heir to an expectation that he would restore the East Coast Brotherhood to its perceived rightful place, not merely as a humanitarian organization, but as a disciplined, technologically dominant order, capable of asserting its authority and safeguarding mankind from the misuse of the tools that had once brought civilization to ruin. The Citadel, with its towering steel walls, labyrinthine corridors, and archives filled with the relics of a bygone era, became both his sanctuary and his crucible, shaping Arthur Maxson into a figure who would later rise to eldership not simply through merit, but through the symbolic power of lineage, the weight of history, and the practical demonstration of unmatched skill, judgment, and dedication, ultimately forging a leader whose authority would command respect, loyalty, and fear across the Commonwealth and beyond, and whose actions would reaffirm the enduring legacy of the Maxson line within the Brotherhood of Steel. The collapse of Line's Brotherhood of Steel was not a singular event, but the culmination of decades of ideological divergence, territorial overextension, and the relentless pressures of a post-apocalyptic world that demanded uncompromising leadership. And at the heart of this decline lay the stark contrast between the founding principles of Roger Maxson and the humanistic interpretation championed by Elder Lyons, whose decision to prioritize the protection of wasteland civilians over rigid adherence to the Brotherhood's original mission planted the seeds of both admiration and dissent among his subordinates, while Lyons' efforts to assist settlements, defend innocents, and integrate humanitarian values into the Brotherhood's daily operations earned him the loyalty of many paladins and scribes, who believed that preserving life was an extension of their sacred duty to safeguard humanity. These very policies also alienated a significant portion of the Order's veteran, knights and council members who saw any deviation from isolationism and technological preservation as sacrilege, a dilution of the martial and doctrinal purity that had sustained the Brotherhood for centuries. And this ideological schism became increasingly pronounced following the death of Sarah Lyons, a warrior of unparalleled skill and charisma whose leadership had acted as the emotional and operational glue for the East Coast chapter. Her absence left a vacuum that exposed latent divisions, prompting senior paladins to question the wisdom of Lyons' leniency and to advocate for stricter enforcement of traditional codes, while many scribes argued for the continued integration of civil aid into the Brotherhood's mission, generating internal friction that manifested in recruitment challenges, mission prioritization conflicts, and sporadic insubordination that weakened command cohesion, a deterioration that was further compounded by the ever-present threat of external adversaries, including raider factions, super-mutant warlords, and remnants of the Enclave, all of whom seized upon the Brotherhood's internal discord to challenge its territorial and technological dominance. As resources were stretched thin and patrols increasingly failed to maintain order in the Capital Wasteland, the organization's reputation began to erode among the wasteland populace leading to tensions between loyalist paladins who remained committed to Lyons' vision and dissenting officers who longed for a return to the founder's uncompromising doctrine. And these tensions reached a critical point when several veteran knights staged independent expeditions, undermining the command hierarchy and signaling a tacit rebellion that questioned Elder Lyons' authority and exposed the Order's fragility to both internal and external observers. Throughout this period, Arthur Maxson, still a youth but already recognized as the last descendant of Roger Maxson, observed the disintegration with a mixture of apprehension and clarity, noting the vulnerabilities introduced by Lyons' deviation from strict martial order and internalizing the lessons of leadership, loyalty, and the consequences of ideological compromise. He watched as debates over policy escalated into public confrontations within the Citadel's council chambers, as supply lines were disrupted by political infighting, and as field operations suffered from inconsistent strategic directives, all while morale declined among rank-and-file soldiers who were torn between admiration for Lyons' humanitarian ideals and respect for the enduring symbolism of the Maxson bloodline. This collapse was not merely structural, but also cultural. The Brotherhood's identity fractured, its narrative of purpose muddled by conflicting interpretations of duty, and the Order's once unified voice splintered into competing doctrines, each claiming to represent the true path of Roger Maxson's vision. And in this climate, the need for a unifying figure became apparent, a leader capable of reconciling the disparate factions, restoring operational efficiency, and reaffirming the foundational principles that had originally sustained the organization. The fall of Lyons' Brotherhood thus serves as a study in organizational fragility, demonstrating how even an institution built upon rigid hierarchies, advanced technology, and centuries of tradition can succumb to internal ideological conflict when the balance between moral purpose and doctrinal fidelity is misaligned. And it is within this context that the significance of Arthur Maxson's emergence becomes clear, as his subsequent rise to prominence was predicated not merely on inherited bloodline, but on his capacity to navigate the complexities, failures, and lessons of Lyons' tenure, ultimately synthesizing the discipline of the founder with the tempered insights of a humanitarian approach to forge a new era for the Brotherhood of Steel on the East Coast, where survival, order, and the preservation of technology would once again be inseparably linked under a single, unifying leadership that carried forward the Maxson legacy while correcting the strategic and ideological missteps that had precipitated the prior collapse. Arthur Maxson's adolescence marked the transformation from observer to active participant in the Brotherhood of Steel as the weight of his lineage pressed upon him, and the fractured remnants of Lyons' Brotherhood demanded a new standard of leadership. And in this crucible of ideological tension, young Arthur's aptitude for both strategy and discipline began to distinguish him among his peers and mentors, drawing the attention of senior paladins who recognized in him not merely the symbolic inheritance of the Maxson bloodline, but the practical potential to unify a splintered organization. Under the watchful eyes of instructors, paladins, and council members, he undertook rigorous physical training, mastering hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, survival tactics, and battlefield coordination, while simultaneously absorbing theoretical knowledge in pre-war technology, tactical history, and the ethical philosophy that underpinned the Brotherhood's existence. A dual curriculum designed to mold him into a leader capable of navigating both the moral and practical imperatives of command, and each success, failure, and lesson was amplified by the awareness that his actions were constantly measured against the standards set by his ancestors, most notably Roger Maxson, whose founding principles of technological stewardship, uncompromising order, and martial discipline formed the benchmark against which Arthur evaluated himself and the organization he was destined to lead. This period of development was punctuated by the challenges inherent in the Citadel's environment, where the remnants of Lion's faction, while loyal, often disagreed with the interpretation of policy, and where Arthur was forced to negotiate, persuade, and sometimes confront his elders and peers in ways that honed his judgment and cultivated an understanding of command that extended beyond mere authority, emphasizing persuasion, legitimacy, and the delicate management of competing personalities and ideologies within a hierarchical yet fragmented structure. Field exercises and training missions became arenas in which Arthur could demonstrate not only skill but leadership, commanding small units in simulated and actual engagements with hostile raider bands, super mutant incursions, and other threats to the Citadel and surrounding territories, learning firsthand the critical importance of coordination, morale, and adaptability in maintaining both mission success and troop cohesion, while also grappling with the human costs of command, recognizing that each decision could result in life or death for those under his charge, a burden he accepted with a solemn awareness of the responsibilities conferred upon him by his heritage and his emerging rank. Arthur's relationships with mentors such as Paladin Cross and other senior officers provided additional dimensions to his growth, offering guidance in diplomacy, tactical innovation, and the subtleties of brotherhood politics, while simultaneously reinforcing the Maxson ideals of loyalty, honor, and the sanctity of the Order's technological mission, creating in him a synthesis of inherited expectation and earned capability, a combination that would later underpin his credibility as the youngest Paladin to wield significant influence within the East Coast Brotherhood. Through countless exercises, council deliberations, and patrol missions, Arthur developed a nuanced comprehension of the Brotherhood's operational needs, recognizing that the preservation of pre-war technology, the training of competent soldiers, and the enforcement of doctrinal cohesion were inseparable, and that success required both intellectual rigor and an ability to inspire, discipline, and coordinate the complex human machinery of a fractured organization, while simultaneously managing the ideological tensions that persisted from Lion's humanitarian deviations. These years also exposed Arthur to the broader socio-political realities of the Capital Wasteland, including the struggles of settlements, the threat posed by super-mutant strongholds, the encroachment of hostile factions, and the consequences of mismanaged engagements, each encounter serving as both practical training and moral education, instilling in him a perspective that balanced compassion with pragmatic necessity, and teaching that the Brotherhood's mission was inseparable from its capacity for disciplined action, strategic foresight, and unwavering command. By late adolescence, Arthur had not only mastered technical and martial disciplines, but had also demonstrated an exceptional capacity for leadership, earning the respect of peers and mentors alike, while navigating the complexities of internal politics, external threats, and the weight of his hereditary responsibilities. A combination of skill, insight, and lineage that positioned him to bridge the ideological and operational gaps left by Lions, to restore cohesion, and to lay the record foundation for his eventual rise to eldership, a path that would redefine the East Coast Brotherhood's identity and reaffirm the Maxson legacy as both a symbol and instrument of order, discipline and technological stewardship in a fractured and perilous wasteland. The period of exile and reformation marked a pivotal juncture in Arthur Maxson's ascension, representing both a physical and ideological journey in which the young heir of the Maxson bloodline confronted the fractured remnants of the East Coast Brotherhood and undertook the formidable task of reclaiming its foundational principles. And it was during this time that Arthur, guided by his acute awareness of the failures of Lion's Brotherhood and the necessity of restoring discipline, made the difficult decision to depart from the Citadel, gathering a contingent of loyal paladins and scribes who shared his vision of a brotherhood aligned with the doctrines established by Roger Maxson and tempered by the practical lessons of Lion's humanitarian deviations. This exodus was not merely an escape, but a strategic repositioning, a deliberate assertion of authority and legitimacy intended to establish a nucleus around which the fragmented order could coalesce. And as Arthur led his followers through the perilous and irradiated expanses of the Capital Wasteland, he was forced to contend with both external threats, including raiders, supermutants, and hostile environmental hazards, and internal challenges, as differing interpretations of loyalty, strategy, and ideology required delicate management, negotiation, and at times, uncompromising discipline to maintain cohesion and morale among the small but ideologically unified cadre. During these formative campaigns, Arthur's command was characterized by a blend of rigor, foresight, and adaptability, reflecting his synthesis of the founder's uncompromising vision and Lion's tempered humanity, as he implemented operational doctrines that emphasized technological preservation, structured chain of command, and strict adherence to ethical and tactical codes, ensuring that every mission, patrol, and recovery operation reinforced both the practical capabilities and the ideological cohesion of his emerging faction, and by doing so, he gradually cultivated a culture of loyalty and excellence that would serve as the foundation for the Brotherhood's resurgence. The Reformation aspect of this period involved not merely the consolidation of personnel, but a systematic re-establishment of ranks, training protocols, and doctrinal education, as Arthur instilled in his followers a renewed reverence for pre-war technology, the ethical stewardship of powerful armaments, and the importance of strategic foresight, blending formal instruction with experiential leadership on the field, and fostering an environment in which merit, skill, and adherence to the Brotherhood's principles were paramount, while simultaneously addressing the psychological and moral development of his recruits to ensure that they could embody the ideals he sought to restore. This era also demanded a careful calibration of Arthur's emerging authority, as he balanced the symbolic weight of his bloodline with the practical necessity of earning trust and legitimacy among seasoned veterans who had witnessed the decline under Lions and who were wary of youthful zeal, and through disciplined training, transparent command decisions, and demonstration of tactical brilliance, Arthur established himself as both a leader and a unifying figure capable of bridging the generational and ideological gaps that had previously threatened to fracture the East Coast Brotherhood irreparably. Throughout the exile, the strategic relocation of key personnel, establishment of secure forward operating positions, and meticulous planning of resource acquisition and preservation underscored Arthur's understanding that the survival of the order depended as much on logistical competence and foresight as on combat prowess and ideological clarity, and these efforts ensured that the nascent faction maintained operational integrity despite constant exposure to hostile forces, environmental hazards, and the ever-present risk of attrition. As the group navigated the wasteland, Arthur emphasized the continuity of the Brotherhood's traditions, incorporating ceremonial observances, historical education, and reinforcement of the Maxson lineage as both symbolic and practical guidance for ethical and operational decision-making, cultivating a sense of purpose and identity among his followers that transcended mere survival and instilled a commitment to the long-term restoration and preservation of the order. By the conclusion of the exile period, Arthur Maxson had successfully transformed a fragmented and demoralized collection of loyalists into a disciplined, cohesive, and ideologically unified force, capable of executing complex missions, maintaining strict adherence to chain of command, and projecting authority and presence across the remnants of the Capital Wasteland, thereby laying the groundwork for the Brotherhood's eventual resurgence and the re-establishment of East Coast dominance under the Maxson lineage. And this phase of exile and reformation stands as a testament to Arthur's capacity for leadership, strategic vision, and doctrinal fidelity, bridging the lessons of Lyon's humanitarian deviations with the uncompromising order of the founder, and creating a foundation upon which the next phase of his ascension and the Brotherhood's renewal would be built. Following the period of exile and consolidation, Arthur Maxson embarked on the critical task of reforging the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel, transforming the small, ideologically unified nucleus he had cultivated into a fully operational and disciplined military organization capable of executing large-scale campaigns, enforcing doctrinal purity, and asserting technological dominance in a post-apocalyptic landscape fraught with danger and uncertainty. And central to this process was the re-establishment of strict hierarchical structures, as Arthur reinstated lost ranks, clarified chains of command, and codified operational protocols that emphasized efficiency, loyalty, and adherence to the core principles of the Maxson lineage, ensuring that every paladin, scribe, and sentinel understood not only their duties, but also the philosophical and historical imperatives that underpinned their service. This period involved intensive training regimens, rigorous field exercises, and continuous evaluation of both individual competence and unit cohesion, with Arthur personally overseeing drills that integrated the recovery and preservation of pre-war technology, advanced combat tactics, and ethical decision-making in scenarios that simulated the complex realities of the wasteland, reinforcing a culture of accountability and excellence that would become the hallmark of his leadership and the foundation upon which the revitalized Brotherhood would project power. Alongside operational restructuring, Arthur implemented ideological reforms designed to unify a previously fragmented organization, addressing the lingering influence of Lyon's humanitarian deviations, while emphasizing a return to the uncompromising order and technological reverence established by Roger Maxson, and through targeted instruction, mentorship, and doctrinal reinforcement, he instilled a sense of purpose and identity in the Brotherhood's members, aligning personal ambition with the broader mission, fostering a collective loyalty that was both disciplined and inspired by the symbolic weight of the Maxson bloodline. Strategic planning and resource management were equally critical, as Arthur oversaw the establishment of secure supply lines, forward operating positions, and logistical protocols to ensure the Brotherhood could sustain operations independently, maintain technological superiority, and project authority across contested territories, while also emphasizing the ethical stewardship of advanced weaponry and knowledge, reinforcing the principle that technological mastery must be coupled with moral and operational responsibility. Arthur's leadership style during this reformation blended firm discipline with selective empowerment, granting experienced officers autonomy in operational matters while maintaining ultimate authority, thereby cultivating initiative, reinforcing meritocratic principles, and ensuring that the organization remained flexible and adaptive even as it adhered to strict ideological standards. And this balance proved essential in maintaining cohesion among veterans who had endured the disarray of Lyons's era, as well as in integrating new recruits who required both guidance and a clear framework of expectations. Through careful campaign planning, structured training, and ideological education, Arthur successfully expanded the Brotherhood's operational footprint, reclaiming territories previously abandoned, recovering critical pre-war technology, and establishing a reputation for both military competence and doctrinal fidelity, signaling to the Wasteland that the East Coast Brotherhood was not only restored but reinforced under capable, authoritative, and visionary leadership, and these achievements solidified Arthur Maxson's reputation among both internal and external observers as a unifying force capable of bridging the lessons of the past with the demands of a turbulent present, thereby cementing the foundation upon which his subsequent rise to eldership, the commissioning of the Prydwen, and the full-scale campaigns into the Commonwealth would be realized, ultimately redefining the identity, strength, and strategic position of the Brotherhood of Steel on the East Coast, and ensuring that the legacy of the Maxson line remained both symbolic and practically influential in shaping the future of post-war America. Arthur Maxson's ascension to the rank of Elder marked the culmination of decades of preparation, strategic consolidation, and the disciplined reformation of the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel, and this rise was as much symbolic as it was practical, representing the restoration of the Maxson bloodline to the apex of the Order's hierarchy, while simultaneously providing a unifying authority over a faction that had previously been fractured and weakened by ideological divergence and operational inefficiencies. In assuming the mantle of Elder, Arthur was formally recognized as the youngest leader in the Brotherhood's history to wield such authority, a testament not only to his lineage, but to the demonstrable competence, discipline, and tactical brilliance that he had cultivated since adolescence under the mentorship of seasoned paladins, scribes, and surviving veterans of Lyon's era, and his authority was immediately reinforced through a series of public councils, strategic deployments, and demonstrations of military prowess that asserted both doctrinal fidelity and operational supremacy. The process of assuming leadership required Arthur to navigate a complex landscape of loyalties, skepticism, and lingering factionalism, as remnants of Lyon's humanitarian-inclined followers both revered his moral insight and questioned the strictness of his interpretation of the founder's original vision, and he addressed these tensions through decisive action, transparent command, and the strategic integration of dissenting members into a unified chain of command, ensuring that ideological differences were subordinated to the overarching goals of technological preservation, operational cohesion, and the restoration of the Brotherhood's authority. His policies emphasized absolute obedience, merit-based advancement, and the uncompromising enforcement of standards across all ranks, with Arthur personally overseeing training, mission planning, and resource allocation to demonstrate the efficacy and fairness of his leadership, while simultaneously reinforcing the sacred lineage of the Maxson name as both a moral and practical guide for his followers, ensuring that every paladin, scribe, and sentinel understood the weight of their duty, the necessity of disciplined service, and the historical continuity of the Brotherhood's mission. This period also involved the careful management of external perception, as Arthur sought to reassert the Brotherhood's dominance in the Capital Wasteland and the surrounding regions, projecting authority through coordinated campaigns, technological superiority, and strategic positioning while cultivating an image of moral and martial legitimacy, thereby solidifying the Brotherhood's standing among both allies and adversaries, and signaling to the Wasteland that the Order had emerged from internal disarray under a leader of unmatched capability. Throughout this transition, Arthur demonstrated a combination of charisma, decisiveness, and ideological clarity that inspired confidence and loyalty among troops and commanders alike, bridging generational divides, reconciling past grievances, and establishing a cohesive organizational culture that emphasized both reverence for the founder and practical adaptability in the face of environmental and political challenges, a synthesis that would define his leadership and set the stage for the subsequent mobilization of the Prydwen and the Brotherhood's expansion into the Commonwealth. Ultimately, Arthur Maxson's rise to Elder was not merely a personal achievement, but a strategic and symbolic turning point for the East Coast Brotherhood, restoring the Order's operational capabilities, reasserting the Maxson legacy, and cementing a leadership model that combined ancestral authority, practical competence, and disciplined ideology, ensuring that the Brotherhood of Steel would once again emerge as a dominant force capable of shaping the post-apocalyptic landscape according to the principles established by its founder and refined through the trials of decades of internal conflict and reformation. The commissioning and construction of the Prydwen represented both a technological marvel and a symbol of the renewed power, discipline, and vision of the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel under Elder Arthur Maxson, and its birth was the culmination of years of strategic planning, resource consolidation, and ideological unification, serving simultaneously as a mobile command center, a fortress in the skies, and a visible testament to the restored strength and reach of the Brotherhood. And this period was defined by Maxson's meticulous attention to both the practical and symbolic elements of the airship's creation, as he oversaw the selection of engineers, the recovery of critical pre-war technology, and the coordination of logistical operations across the wasteland, ensuring that every element of the Prydwen's design and deployment reflected the values of efficiency, military supremacy, and technological reverence that had long defined his family's legacy. The Prydwen itself, a massive airship based on repurposed vertibird technology and fortified with pre-war engineering advancements, required an unprecedented level of planning and resource management, as Maxson coordinated teams of paladins, scribes, and civilian engineers to ensure structural integrity, propulsion efficiency, and combat readiness, while simultaneously integrating the Brotherhood's operational doctrines into the ship's command hierarchy, training crews in navigation, aerial combat tactics, and the ethical and strategic use of the ship's arsenal, so that the Prydwen would not merely be a vessel, but a fully functional mobile headquarters, capable of sustaining extended campaigns and projecting power across the Commonwealth. During its construction, Maxson personally supervised recovery missions to secure critical materials, advanced technology, and schematics scattered throughout the Capital Wasteland, often placing himself and his elite paladins in direct danger to demonstrate the seriousness of the mission and inspire loyalty among troops, establishing a precedent of leadership by example that reinforced the cultural and operational cohesion of the Brotherhood and serving as a reminder that the restoration of power and the preservation of technological heritage were inseparably linked in both practice and ideology. The Prydwen's completion also represented a profound shift in the Brotherhood's strategic posture, transforming the organization from a terrestrial force with limited reach into a mobile, technologically dominant power capable of rapid deployment, intelligence gathering, and direct intervention against both human and superhuman threats, effectively consolidating the East Coast Brotherhood under a single operational and symbolic banner, and signaling to Wastelanders, adversaries, and allies alike that the Maxson-led order had emerged from internal strife into a unified and dominant force, with both the means and the mandate to assert its vision of order and technological stewardship. Arthur Maxson's personal involvement in the Prydwen project extended beyond logistics and command into ideological codification, as he ensured that the airship itself embodied the principles of the Maxson lineage, from the precise organization of crew and officer ranks to the ceremonial and symbolic use of space within the vessel, emphasizing the continuity of the Brotherhood's heritage, while also projecting the Order's power in a manner that would inspire awe, loyalty, and fear, and reinforcing the narrative that the Maxson bloodline was both a practical and moral foundation for leadership, bridging the lessons of Roger Maxson and the operational realities of a modernized brotherhood. The birth of the Prydwen was accompanied by the careful orchestration of public perception and internal morale, as Maxson orchestrated ceremonies, strategic communications, and demonstrations of operational capability to both the Brotherhood's membership and the surrounding wasteland, emphasizing the ship's dual purpose as a symbol of unity and a tool for the fulfillment of the Brotherhood's mission, while simultaneously addressing the concerns of those skeptical of centralized authority or concerned about the human cost of aggressive expansion. Furthermore, the Prydwen served as a central hub for the re-establishment of disciplined command protocols, training programs, and strategic coordination, allowing Maxson to implement operational reforms on a scale previously impossible, standardizing communication, logistics, and mission execution across dispersed units, and providing a secure, mobile base from which to extend the Brotherhood's reach into contested territories, recover advanced technology, and enforce ideological conformity, solidifying the organization's cohesion and combat effectiveness. As the airship ascended into the skies above the Capital Wasteland, it became not only a functional instrument of war governance, but a tangible manifestation of Maxson's vision, a floating embodiment of the Maxson legacy, and a clear declaration to all factions that the East Coast Brotherhood, under his guidance, had been reborn, its strength, discipline, and technological mastery once again recognized and feared, and the Prydwen thus stands as a pivotal achievement in Arthur Maxson's leadership, both operationally and symbolically, marking the transition from a fractured, uncertain faction to a dominant, centralized, and ideologically cohesive force prepared to project power, enforce order, and safeguard the technological heritage of humanity in accordance with the principles established by Roger Maxson and refined through decades of trials, conflict, and strategic foresight. The march of the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel under Elder Arthur Maxson toward the Commonwealth represented a monumental strategic operation, one that combined unprecedented logistical coordination, ideological clarity, and a calculated projection of force that would redefine the balance of power in the post-apocalyptic Northeast. And it was a campaign meticulously planned to demonstrate the restored strength, unity, and technological supremacy of the Maxson-led Brotherhood, as well as to confront the Institute, whose clandestine activities, synthetic creations, and manipulation of the Commonwealth's population posed a direct challenge to both the ethical and operational imperatives that Maxson had established for his order. The campaign required the mobilization of thousands of paladins, scribes, and support personnel, coordinated across terrestrial and aerial units, with the Prydwen serving as both a mobile command center and a logistical hub, facilitating rapid deployment, intelligence gathering, and command oversight, ensuring that every operation, from reconnaissance to direct engagement, adhered to strict protocols and maximized the Brotherhood's technological and tactical advantages, while simultaneously reinforcing internal cohesion and loyalty through visible demonstrations of discipline, competence, and the symbolic authority of the Maxson bloodline. The march involved complex coordination of supply lines, forward operating bases, and safe transit through territories contested by raiders, supermutants, and other hostile factions, requiring both meticulous planning and flexible execution, as Maxson personally oversaw strategic decisions, deployment priorities, and risk assessment, emphasizing the need for operational precision, technological preservation, and ethical conduct in line with the Brotherhood's codified mission, and demonstrating his capacity to integrate historical lessons from the collapse of Lion's Brotherhood into practical, real-time leadership. As the Brotherhood advanced, Maxson's ideological framework guided their interactions with local populations, settlements, and potential allies, with strict orders for discipline, protection of innocence, and the retrieval or destruction of pre-war technology falling under centralized command, reinforcing both the tactical and moral dimensions of the campaign and highlighting the dual role of the Brotherhood as both a militarized force and a steward of human knowledge and survival, a balance that Maxson meticulously maintained to prevent the drift toward unchecked authoritarianism while still asserting decisive control over contested regions. The operation was punctuated by direct confrontations with Institute forces, reconnaissance missions into urban centers, and the recovery of advanced pre-war and Institute technology, all executed with the precision and doctrinal fidelity characteristic of Maxson's leadership, and each success, or setback, served both as a practical lesson for the Brotherhood's troops and as reinforcement of the broader narrative of the Maxson-led faction as the legitimate and disciplined authority in the region, capable of projecting power, enforcing order, and securing humanity's technological heritage against misuse or corruption. Maxson's speeches, directives, and personal presence during these movements served to inspire confidence, maintain morale, and establish his authority as both a commander and symbolic figure, emphasizing the continuity of the Maxson legacy and the restoration of the Brotherhood's operational integrity after decades of ideological ambiguity and decline, and reinforcing the notion that the Brotherhood's mission, while militarily exacting, was inseparable from its moral and historical purpose. Strategically, the march was designed to encircle, contain, and neutralize Institute operations, employing a combination of aerial surveillance from the Prydwen, ground patrols, and coordinated strikes, all while maintaining strict communication protocols, supply integrity, and operational security, showcasing Maxson's ability to orchestrate multi-dimensional campaigns that leveraged both technology and disciplined human capital, ensuring that the Brotherhood maintained superiority in every operational domain, and that each decision was guided by both tactical reasoning and adherence to the ideological principles of the Order, Ultimately, the march to the Commonwealth was not merely a military maneuver, but a comprehensive demonstration of Maxson's vision, combining logistical brilliance, ideological reinforcement, and tactical excellence to restore the East Coast Brotherhood to a position of unquestioned authority, preparing the stage for the subsequent confrontation with the Institute, the imposition of the Brotherhood's doctrine across contested regions, and the affirmation of Maxson's role as a decisive, unifying, and transformative leader whose command would permanently reshape the strategic, political, and technological landscape of the post-apocalyptic Northeast. The campaign waged by Elder Arthur Maxson against the Institute represented far more than a conventional military operation. It was an ideological crusade in which the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel sought to assert the primacy of human agency, technological stewardship, and moral responsibility over the clandestine synthetic manipulations perpetrated by the Institute, and it was framed by Maxson as a decisive struggle to preserve humanity's autonomy, cultural continuity, and survival in a world where unchecked technological innovation had already caused cataclysmic consequences. A mission that fused the operational, ethical, and symbolic dimensions of leadership in a manner uniquely suited to the Maxson vision, combining precise command, rigorous doctrine, and unwavering moral clarity to legitimize both the strategic objectives and the authority of the Brotherhood. Throughout the campaign, Maxson meticulously coordinated aerial, terrestrial, and intelligence-gathering operations, leveraging the Prydwen's mobility and technological superiority to orchestrate multi-pronged strikes, while maintaining strict control over the use and preservation of advanced weaponry, emphasizing that the Brotherhood's moral mandate to safeguard humanity required both the neutralization of dangerous technology and the disciplined exercise of lethal force, thereby ensuring that each action reinforced the dual imperatives of operational effectiveness and ethical responsibility. His speeches and directives communicated a clear ideological framework to his troops, emphasizing the dangers of synthetic life, the moral and existential stakes of the conflict, and the centrality of the Maxson lineage in guiding the Brotherhood's interpretation of justice and duty, instilling in soldiers a sense of both purpose and historical continuity, while simultaneously motivating compliance, courage, and disciplined execution of complex operations that spanned urban centers, wasteland, settlements, and Institute-controlled installations. The war itself involved the careful planning and execution of reconnaissance missions to map Institute infrastructure, infiltration operations, to assess technological capabilities, and direct assaults aimed at disrupting the production of synthetic humanoids, all conducted with attention to minimizing collateral damage to civilian populations, while maximizing the degradation of the Institute's operational capacity, reflecting Maxson's strategic acumen and adherence to the doctrine of technological stewardship. Throughout these engagements, Maxson's leadership style was simultaneously authoritarian and charismatic, as he exercised absolute command over tactical decisions while inspiring loyalty and morale through personal presence, rigorous training standards, and the symbolic invocation of the Maxson heritage, reinforcing the unity of the Brotherhood and legitimizing its actions in both moral and operational terms. And this combination of authority and inspiration ensured that the organization functioned with unprecedented cohesion, efficiency, and ideological clarity. The conflict was not merely a military endeavor, but a profound confrontation over the philosophical and ethical trajectory of humanity, with Maxson framing the Institute's creation of synthetic life as a fundamental threat to free will, the social contract, and the preservation of human knowledge, and positioning the Brotherhood's intervention as a necessary corrective to maintain the integrity of civilization, the sanctity of pre-war technology, and the survival of human culture, a narrative that was communicated with strategic clarity to troops, civilians, and adversaries alike. As the campaign progressed, Maxson oversaw the integration of recovered technology, intelligence from defectors and informants, and battlefield outcomes into a continuously adaptive operational doctrine, emphasizing the need for both tactical flexibility and doctrinal adherence, and demonstrating the capacity of the Brotherhood under his command to learn from each engagement, consolidate gains, and systematically dismantle the Institute's influence while maintaining strict internal discipline and ideological coherence. Ultimately, the war for humanity's soul served as both a military and moral touchstone, defining Maxson's leadership, solidifying the Brotherhood's doctrinal authority, and establishing the ethical, operational, and symbolic frameworks that would guide subsequent interactions with Commonwealth factions, the reconstruction of post-war society, and the projection of technological and martial power, and in its culmination, it reinforced the narrative of the Maxson bloodline as a living link between the foundational principles of the Brotherhood and the exigencies of a world in which the preservation of humanity, the responsible exercise of technological power, and the assertion of disciplined order were inseparably intertwined, and where Elder Arthur Maxson emerged as both the executor and the embodiment of these imperatives in their most complete and uncompromising form. Elder Arthur Maxson's command of the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel was characterized by a singular combination of iron discipline, personal charisma, and tactical brilliance, a leadership style that not only enforced cohesion and obedience among thousands of paladins, scribes, and support personnel, but also fostered a culture of loyalty, reverence for the Maxson lineage, and confidence in the Brotherhood's mission to preserve human civilization and technology. And it was through this synthesis of authority and personal magnetism that Maxson became both a revered and feared figure, a commander whose presence could inspire unflinching obedience and courage in battle, and whose strategic insight ensured that operational plans were executed with precision, efficiency, and ideological fidelity. His charisma was evident in the way he addressed troops, conveying both the historical weight of the Maxson name and the practical exigencies of their campaigns, instilling a sense of purpose and personal investment in each mission, while simultaneously maintaining a strict adherence to the doctrines of the Brotherhood. And through personal example, whether in overseeing missions, participating in field operations, or demonstrating mastery over pre-war and recovered technology, Maxson reinforced the legitimacy of his authority and the efficacy of disciplined leadership. Maxson's command extended beyond mere operational direction into the careful cultivation of morale, esprit de corps, and loyalty, understanding that effective leadership required both the projection of strength and the ability to inspire trust and confidence among subordinates. And he achieved this balance through consistent enforcement of rules, public recognition of merit, and a personal presence that conveyed both accessibility and unassailable authority, ensuring that every member of the Brotherhood internalized their duty, while remaining committed to the larger organizational mission. The psychological dimension of Maxson's leadership was equally significant, as he navigated the complexities of human motivation, factional loyalties, and individual ambition, employing a combination of strategic incentives, moral framing, and personal engagement to maintain cohesion and prevent the fracturing that had previously undermined the East Coast Brotherhood during Lyon's tenure, and in doing so, he created an environment in which discipline and loyalty were inseparably linked, and where the organizational culture reinforced operational effectiveness, ideological purity, and the projection of power in both symbolic and practical terms. His charisma also played a critical role in external relations, as Maxson's reputation as a decisive, competent, and morally grounded leader shaped perceptions among allied factions, rivals, and the broader wasteland population, facilitating negotiations, enforcing deterrence, and consolidating the Brotherhood's influence across contested territories, and ensuring that the organization's strategic goals were supported not only by military might, but also by the symbolic authority derived from his presence, lineage, and demonstrated competence. Operationally, Maxson combined charisma with meticulous planning, leveraging his personal authority to enforce rigorous standards, optimize troop deployments, and maintain the integrity of the Brotherhood's logistical, technological, and command systems, ensuring that every engagement, whether a large-scale assault, reconnaissance mission, or resource recovery operation, was executed with maximum efficiency, minimum risk, and adherence to the ethical and doctrinal principles that defined his leadership. And in doing so, he demonstrated that charisma without discipline would be insufficient, and that true command required the integration of personal influence, moral authority, and strategic competence into a cohesive framework. This synthesis of command and charisma also reinforced the Maxson legacy as a living embodiment of the founder's vision, providing a model for leadership that combined historical reverence, practical effectiveness, and psychological insight, and setting a precedent for the future of the Brotherhood, as successive generations of leaders could draw upon the lessons of his approach, which demonstrated that the projection of power, the enforcement of discipline, and the cultivation of personal loyalty were mutually reinforcing elements critical to the survival, cohesion, and expansion of the organization. Ultimately, Maxson's leadership style, combining iron discipline, personal charisma, and operational brilliance, ensured the East Coast Brotherhood's transformation into a cohesive, ideologically unified, and technologically dominant force, capable of achieving both strategic objectives and the symbolic affirmation of the Maxson lineage, reinforcing the narrative of a leader whose authority was simultaneously inherited, earned, and demonstrated through unwavering competence, tactical insight, and the inspired loyalty of those under his command, and whose presence and actions would define the Brotherhood's identity and operational doctrine for decades to come. The political landscape of the Commonwealth presented a complex and multifaceted challenge for Elder Arthur Maxson and the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel, as the interplay of factions such as the Minutemen, the Railroad, remnants of the Institute, and independent settlements required a sophisticated balance of diplomacy, force projection, and strategic negotiation, and it was within this environment that Maxson's leadership was tested not only on the battlefield, but in the realm of influence, perception, and ideological supremacy, demanding that he consolidate the Brotherhood's authority while simultaneously navigating the often conflicting interests, moral frameworks, and operational capabilities of regional powers, and ensuring that the organization's expansion was not merely a military endeavor, but a demonstration of the Maxson lineage's capacity to unify, control, and legitimize order in a fragmented post-war society. Maxson approached the Commonwealth with a combination of calculated aggression and strategic diplomacy, asserting the Brotherhood's technological superiority as both a deterrent and a bargaining tool, while maintaining rigorous internal discipline to prevent rogue actions or ideological drift that could undermine the organization's credibility, and through careful management of relations with the Minutemen and other allied or neutral groups, he sought to project the image of an unstoppable, yet principled force, capable of enforcing its vision of human and technological stewardship without unnecessary destruction, thereby legitimizing the Brotherhood's presence and operations in the region. Engagements with the railroad and other insurgent factions were approached with measured decisiveness, reflecting Maxson's recognition of the existential stakes of technological control, as the production and distribution of synths and unregulated pre-war technology represented both a moral and strategic threat, and his actions in these cases emphasized the dual imperative of neutralizing threats while consolidating the Brotherhood's influence, reinforcing a culture of absolute obedience, operational efficiency, and ethical fidelity, and sending a clear signal to all regional actors that resistance would be met with swift, coordinated, and overwhelming response. Maxson's political acumen was further evident in his capacity to integrate intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, and social analysis into decision-making, allowing the Brotherhood to anticipate potential challenges, negotiate alliances where beneficial, and preempt opposition through calculated displays of force or strategic deterrence, and in doing so, he ensured that the organization maintained not only operational superiority, but also narrative dominance, controlling both perception and reality in ways that reinforced the Maxson legacy and the Brotherhood's ideological primacy. Internal political management was equally critical, as Maxson navigated the lingering influence of Lyon's loyalists, integrated new recruits from disparate backgrounds, and maintained cohesion across a rapidly expanding organization, employing a combination of meritocratic promotion, doctrinal education, and visible demonstrations of strategic competence to ensure that the Brotherhood's internal hierarchy remained stable, capable, and loyal, and that all members understood the interdependence of obedience, operational success, and ideological fidelity. Through these combined efforts, Maxson's politics of power were inseparable from his broader mission to safeguard humanity's technological heritage, enforce ideological clarity, and project a disciplined, authoritative presence that could influence both the moral and strategic landscape of the Commonwealth, demonstrating that leadership required not only martial prowess and technological command, but also nuanced understanding of human and organizational dynamics, and the ability to leverage authority, reputation, and tactical advantage to shape outcomes in a fractured and contested post-apocalyptic society. Ultimately, the Brotherhood's political strategy under Maxson transformed the Commonwealth's balance of power, compelling factions to recognize the Order's supremacy, align where possible, or risk strategic marginalization, and in doing so, it reinforced the narrative of the Maxson bloodline as both a historical and operational force, whose leadership, vision, and capacity for decisive action ensured that the East Coast Brotherhood would remain the preeminent power capable of shaping the future of human civilization and technological stewardship in a dangerous and unpredictable world. Beneath the imposing visage of Elder Arthur Maxson, whose command of the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel projected unassailable authority, technological mastery, and strategic brilliance, lay a man shaped by isolation, inherited burden, and the psychological weight of lineage. And it is within this hidden dimension that the personal humanity of Maxson emerges, revealing the complex interplay between duty, personal morality, and the emotional cost of leadership as he navigated the dual imperatives of preserving human civilization through the stewardship of pre-war technology and asserting absolute command over an ideologically rigorous and disciplined military order. The isolation inherent in his role was both a product of circumstance and choice, as the responsibilities of leadership, the expectations imposed by the Maxson name, and the necessity of maintaining operational and ideological cohesion required emotional detachment from personal relationships, yet simultaneously fostered an acute awareness of the human consequences of command decisions, a tension that manifested in rare private moments of reflection, contemplation of strategic and moral dilemmas, and the internalization of both successes and failures within the broader narrative of the Brotherhood's mission. Maxson's psychological profile reveals a man whose upbringing within the Citadel, under the shadow of Lyon's fractured humanitarianism and the lingering influence of past failures, shaped an individual capable of decisive action under extreme pressure, balancing the ethical complexities of technological preservation and human cost against the pragmatic necessities of military effectiveness. And in doing so, he cultivated a personal discipline, resilience, and capacity for strategic foresight that allowed him to operate effectively as both leader and symbol, while bearing the existential weight of accountability for thousands of lives and the fate of human civilization in the East Coast Wasteland. This duality of persona, publicly unyielding, privately reflective, was reinforced by the constant awareness of the Maxson lineage, whose historical legacy served as both guide and burden, providing moral and operational frameworks while amplifying the pressure to uphold an unbroken standard of leadership, technological stewardship, and doctrinal fidelity, and creating an internal landscape in which every decision carried amplified significance, and every failure threatened not only immediate operational outcomes, but the symbolic authority of the Maxson bloodline. Arthur's rare moments of vulnerability, observed only by a few trusted confidants, reveal a leader acutely conscious of the human dimensions of warfare, the moral ambiguity of command, and the psychological toll of enforcing absolute obedience within a militarized and hierarchical organization. And these glimpses of the man beneath the armor underscore the intricate interplay between inherited duty, personal conviction, and the emotional cost of leadership in a post-apocalyptic context, highlighting a dimension of Elder Maxson that contrasts with his public persona, yet informs his effectiveness, resilience, and strategic clarity. The human side of Maxson also manifests in his selective mentorship of subordinate leaders, his attention to the welfare and competence of officers and troops, and the deliberate cultivation of trust, loyalty, and morale, demonstrating that beneath the rigid exterior of discipline and authority lies an acute understanding of psychology, motivation, and the ethical responsibilities of command, and that the projection of invulnerability is inextricably linked with the careful management of human capital and organizational integrity. In sum, the man beneath the armor embodies a synthesis of lineage, personal experience, ethical reflection, and operational acumen, revealing Elder Arthur Maxson as a figure whose public command, doctrinal enforcement, and technological mastery are inseparable from his private deliberations, moral calculus, and the emotional burden of leadership, and whose humanity, though rarely glimpsed, informs the very effectiveness, cohesion, and ideological clarity of the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel, demonstrating that even in the most disciplined, authoritarian, and technologically superior military organization, the weight of human complexity remains both a challenge and a defining feature of supreme command. The reign of Elder Arthur Maxson left an indelible imprint upon the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel, reshaping the organization into a technologically dominant, ideologically unified, and operationally disciplined force. And this legacy, often described as one of fire and steel, is reflected both in the material expansion of the Brotherhood and in the cultural, political, and ethical transformation of its members, whose loyalty, training, and doctrinal adherence reached levels previously unseen since the founding of the Order under Roger Maxson, creating a militarized identity that merged inherited principles with contemporary exigencies, and serving as a model of how leadership, lineage, and operational vision can converge to produce organizational resilience and dominance in a fractured post-apocalyptic world. The long-term consequences of Maxson's rule are evident in the Brotherhood's increasingly authoritarian structure, the uncompromising enforcement of hierarchical obedience, and the strict codification of technological stewardship, which reinforced both operational effectiveness and ideological conformity, while simultaneously engendering debate over the balance between humanistic restraint and pragmatic militarism. As the organization's expanded power and influence occasionally intersected with the moral and ethical concerns of allied settlements and independent factions, revealing the inherent tension between security, preservation, and freedom. Maxson's emphasis on technological supremacy manifested in the construction of the Prydwen, the systematic recovery of pre-war and institute technologies, and the disciplined training of personnel ensured that the Brotherhood became not merely a military entity, but the preeminent custodian of human knowledge and power, capable of projecting influence across the Capital Wasteland and the Commonwealth, while simultaneously reinforcing a culture in which obedience, competence, and reverence for both the Maxson lineage and the founder's original vision became inseparable from the organization's identity, cementing a long-term legacy of authority, capability, and symbolic legitimacy. The Brotherhood's military campaigns, ideological enforcement, and technological consolidation under Maxson reshaped perceptions both internally and externally, creating a narrative in which the East Coast chapter emerged as the standard bearer of order and human survival, a force that could be relied upon for protection, feared for its ruthlessness, and admired for its operational and doctrinal sophistication. And these dual perceptions reinforced Maxson's influence, ensuring that the Brotherhood's authority was recognized as both practical and moral, with every conquest, recovery, and campaign serving as a tangible extension of his leadership and vision. Culturally, Maxson's legacy transformed the organizational identity, instilling a sense of purpose, pride, and historical continuity among members, bridging the generational gaps left by Lyon's tenure, and embedding a doctrine of technological stewardship, martial excellence, and hierarchical obedience into the very fabric of the Brotherhood, creating an internal culture in which operational proficiency, loyalty, and adherence to principle became inseparable from personal and collective identity, and where the symbolic weight of the Maxson bloodline provided both moral guidance and practical authority. Politically and strategically, the effects of Maxson's leadership are evident in the consolidation of East Coast territories, the establishment of relationships and deterrence mechanisms with other factions, and the projection of influence that redefined regional power dynamics. demonstrating that the legacy of fire and steel was not merely symbolic but operationally transformative, reinforcing the Brotherhood's position as the primary arbiter of technological and martial order in the post-war landscape, and establishing a foundation upon which subsequent generations could maintain authority, continuity, and resilience. Ultimately, the legacy of fire and steel embodies both the triumphs and challenges of Maxson's leadership, revealing a brotherhood whose strength, unity, and capability were enhanced to historic levels, while simultaneously highlighting the moral, cultural, and ethical responsibilities inherent in such power, and illustrating how the combination of lineage, ideology, and operational excellence can create an enduring organizational identity that reshapes perceptions, enforces authority, and secures technological and strategic dominance in a volatile and contested post-apocalyptic world. The future of the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel following the campaigns and reign of Elder Arthur Maxson remains a subject of both speculation and historical analysis, as his leadership, vision, and consolidation of power created a legacy that continues to shape organizational strategy, ideological adherence, and operational capacity. And it is within this context that one can examine the enduring influence of the Maxson bloodline, the myths surrounding his decisions, and the structural and cultural foundations he laid for subsequent generations, which together present a complex picture of continuity, adaptation, and potential evolution in the post-apocalyptic Commonwealth. The uncertain fate of the Brotherhood is influenced by several factors, including the long-term sustainability of its hierarchical, militarized structure, the evolving threats posed by human and synthetic adversaries, the challenges of maintaining ideological purity amidst expansion and recruitment, and the necessity of preserving technological supremacy while balancing the ethical and political dimensions of power, all of which require leadership capable of integrating operational, strategic, and moral imperatives, a standard set by Maxson and encoded into organizational practices, doctrines, and training protocols. Myth and legend surround Maxson's leadership, with stories of his tactical brilliance, charisma, and moral rigor transmitted both within the Brotherhood and by external observers, contributing to a perception of the Maxson lineage as an enduring symbol of authority, vision, and doctrinal fidelity, and reinforcing the notion that the East Coast Brotherhood's identity is inseparable from the historical and symbolic weight of its elder, whose actions continue to influence internal cohesion, external relations, and the cultural memory of post-war society. The long-term structural legacy includes a codified hierarchy, operational protocols, and educational systems designed to preserve the ideological and tactical lessons learned during Maxson's campaigns, ensuring that officers and recruits are trained not only in combat proficiency, but also in the philosophical, ethical, and historical dimensions of the Brotherhood's mission, and that every action, from strategic planning to field operations, is guided by the principle of technological stewardship and the projection of disciplined authority. Culturally, the Brotherhood under Maxson's influence is marked by a deeply ingrained reverence for lineage, historical continuity, and organizational identity, which serves to reinforce internal cohesion, loyalty, and morale, while also shaping interactions with allied, neutral, and adversarial factions, ensuring that the Brotherhood remains both a martial and ideological force whose influence extends beyond immediate operational capability into the realms of perception, legitimacy, and strategic deterrence. The future trajectory of the Brotherhood will inevitably be influenced by the adaptation of these lessons to new generations, the integration of emerging leaders capable of balancing the ethical, operational, and symbolic dimensions of authority, and the ongoing necessity of technological vigilance. As the post-apocalyptic world continues to present both opportunities for expansion and challenges from residual human, synthetic, and environmental threats, and it is through this synthesis of continuity, adaptation, and strategic foresight that the East Coast Brotherhood may maintain the dominance, cohesion, and ideological clarity established under Maxson. Ultimately, the enduring legacy of Elder Arthur Maxson is both practical and symbolic, providing a framework for understanding the responsibilities, opportunities, and constraints inherent in leading a technologically advanced, ideologically cohesive, and operationally disciplined organization in a volatile post-apocalyptic landscape, and ensuring that the Brotherhood of Steel, while facing uncertain futures, remains tethered to the principles, doctrines, and strategic vision that have guided it from its founding under Roger Maxson, through its renewal and expansion under Arthur Maxson, and into the possibilities of continued survival, influence, and adaptation in the ever-evolving wasteland of the Commonwealth.